Plain Truth, a show where we discuss anomalies, mysteries, and a bit of geopolitics. I'm your host, Plain, and today joining me is Oolong Rabbit, and we're going to discuss Patsies and lone gunmen. They just seem to be so important, and they're everywhere. So I thought we'd start a little bit with that classic case of Oswald. Oolong, what do you think of Oswald? Was he just another one of these lone communists that are threatening our freedom? They hate our freedom?
Which Oswald? I think there's quite a few of them, wasn't there?
Well, that's the thing. That's the sad thing is it looks like the good one died and the bad one went on to further secret endeavors as near as we can figure. But we'll start with the one we know and love, the one who went on TV and said, "I'm just a patsy," right?
Yeah.
What do you think? Did he have any communistic leanings? Or was he, as his family and others said, did he just enjoy spy stories as a kid, and did he end up working for American intelligence? Which sounds more likely?
I would, yeah, the story's so convoluted. I don't know. He ended up in Russia, and then he ended up coming back. I mean, how could someone, do that back then? I just, the whole thing doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, that's right. He defected, quote unquote. He moved to Russia, the Soviet Union, and married a Russian woman who had a very high-level KGB uncle, as I recall. And then they came back, and he didn't have any money, so the U.S. government had to help him out a lot. And I think a senator greeted him at the airport when he arrived, and then I guess they just forgot to prosecute him for some reason, right? I mean, he went there to give away secrets, right? He had worked at a fairly important base in Japan, Atsugi, which was for spying on the Soviet Union, and he may have had something to do with the Gary Powers case, the famous U-2 incident. Some have said that. But what I thought was interesting is when he was in Japan, he got a sexual disease in his records, and they didn't prosecute him. They didn't give him any bad marks in his military record because they said it was part of his job. So I thought that was pretty funny, right?
That's the first I'd heard of that.
Yes. Well, there's so much about him. You could just his biography alone would take thousands of pages because, as you said, there are like 3 or 4 of them. So, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot to keep up with. But the bigger point, though, is in that particular case, they needed to create a legend, right? They had this story of the guy giving out communistic literature and thinking that Castro was such a great guy. And the idea is, of course, he's just a cartoon character for TV, just like in many ways Bin Laden has been, right? It doesn't even matter if the guy's alive, right? He's just a cartoon character. He's just the latest Joker or whatever the enemy of the day is that they put in the comic strips.
Yep.
And so that's who he was as the public saw him. They saw him as this misguided young man, right? And that was part of the idea because a misguided guy can turn into a lone gunman, right? For no reason, just somehow he thinks that Castro's a good guy, so therefore he would kill Kennedy. And of course, when you think about it, this is really ridiculous because you're going to get Johnson as president. Right? Why would you do that? Right? Right? That's like, I don't know how to say it, but it's like, would a peace-loving guy want to get rid of Obama just so you can get Biden? It sounds a little bit unrealistic to me, but what can you say? The power of media, and so they brainwashed everybody. But I think we can learn a lot. Even just a superficial look at Oswald, because he wasn't immediately killed. I think they planned to kill him, but he did get to say things like, "I'm a patsy," and he got interviewed a little bit. And so then, what happened to him? What happens to patsies? Do you know what happened to him?
Yeah, he got a one-way ticket to the graveyard.
Yeah, he went to the big sleep, and Jack Ruby did it. Yeah. And we've got a lot of people saying that Jack Ruby knew Oswald quite well, maybe from his early days. And so then we'd have to say that others saw Oswald in Ruby's
Strip clubs.
drinking places, strip clubs, hostess bars, things like that. And that makes perfect sense because that was a mafia kind of thing, and Ruby was a mafia guy. Now, when you look at Oswald's past, though, you have to say it looks like he came from a mafia background and also an Eastern European background. Many have
Oswald?
said, yes, many have said that when he was in the Soviet Union, his Russian was actually, he had to hide it. It was very, very good. And this makes perfect sense. I mean, if you're going to send a fake defector, by the way, for those who don't know, there was a fake defector program. It's been declassified. They intentionally sent people over there. But of course, we have no records for Oswald because they're not going to say that, right? But the point is, if you're going to send somebody over there, well, who are you going to send? You're going to send a guy who knows Russian but can pretend that he doesn't know it, right? I mean, otherwise, what value is the guy?
Yeah.
Right? He's got to give you information. That's the reason you want to test their system. But I mean, at the end of the day, it would be immensely more helpful if he could understand Russian. And if you just listen to the guy, you can see he doesn't sound like he's a typical guy from New Orleans or the South or something, just his accent alone, right?
I would like to know how he got back out of the Soviet Union with his KGB pride. So do you think they were trying to flip him, knowing that he was a double agent, or how do you think that played out?
Well, this is a bigger topic, but in my opinion, the Cold War was a construct. It wasn't a real fight the way people at the time thought. I think that today's fight against Russia is actually much, much more dangerous and severe. But at the time, people thought there's this fight to the death with the Soviets, with the commies around the world. And the truth of the matter is the people in high places in both sides, in their military-industrial KGB complexes, wanted business. And business is good with war, and it's not good with peace, right? So they wanted, for example, Kennedy was trying to have an early form of détente with the Soviets, right? And that's just bad for business. But it was bad for the Soviet business side, too, the hard-line people in charge of their military production and things like that. So I think that the answer is Oswald was sent and manipulated by what, for lack of a better word, we could call hardliners, and their equivalent in the Soviet side. And they worked together. I think the U-2 plane incident was a contrived incident against Eisenhower to prevent peace. And the list goes on and on, actually, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's like an octopus with so many tentacles, this whole Kennedy-Oswald thing, right?
Yes. But not only that, it's just the bigger picture of the military-industrial complex. And there was one in the Soviet Union, and actually there is one now in Russia. And peace is not always good for business, you know? And we're not talking small businesses here, you know. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So it's a very, very powerful thing. And I think we also have declassified documents from within the United States system that basically show that some of these people, like General Curtis LeMay and some of these people around them, were basically crazy. I mean, Dr. Strangelove was a comedy film of sorts, but it wasn't. It was true. Okay, the people in the Strategic Air Command were like that. A lot of them did want to start a war, and they even managed at different times to do things like send a single plane off to test the system in the Soviet Union and stuff like that against the general command. And that's ridiculous to have a nuclear bomb carrying plane trying to enter the Soviet Union. And, you know, I mean, what response are you expecting, right?
just hoping nothing's going to happen, right? Or
Yeah,
I guess not. Maybe not even that. Maybe hoping something does happen.
I think they were hoping because I think they were nuts, my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But anyway, and those are the guys who set the atmosphere for what later befell President Kennedy, unfortunately. But I'm just trying to say that Oswald is a fascinating case because, okay, so you got this guy who has mafia connections. obviously spy connections. He goes to the Soviet Union. He's hanging around KGB people. He's, what is going on here? And then there are two or three Oswalds anyway. And that's a very good question. And then how does he end up becoming the Patsy? Oolong, any theories on that?
I don't know. I would say he was just the lowest man on the totem pole, or I don't know. Or do you think that they had something contrived from the get-go, or I'm not sure.
Well, I guess what I'll say is this is a little bit more speculative, but I think that the reason he was chosen is because he wasn't with the program. I think he hated Castro and communism in general, but I think he was not a hardline right-winger type. I think he was actually more of a liberal, if he had to define himself. And you can ask, how would we know that? How would we know the real feelings of a spy and all that? And I'm saying, well, of course we don't. But I think that the Judith Baker story seems quite intriguing, and it would put the pieces together in a fairly reasonable way. Are you familiar with Judith Baker?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so she was a science prodigy as a kid in Florida, and was like winning national science awards for cancer research. She developed some technique in high school that hadn't. She's like the inventor of the technique.
Oh, yes. Okay, it's ringing a bell now. Yeah.
Okay. And so she ends up getting into the environment of cancer research, which was going on in New Orleans, and the CIA and others were trying to find ways to create cancer, and they wanted to give it to Castro. And that's why you had David Ferrie, and you had the head of the Cancer Society, the American Cancer Society, Ochsner, was a fanatic anti-communist, and what can I say? He's from a German background, and anyway, ultra right-winger. How's that?
Yeah.
And so you can imagine what they would have thought of Castro. And anyway, this gal ended up working in labs, and she has papers and evidence of quite a bit. I mean, tax forms and all kinds of other things that make a very strong case that she was with Oswald, and she was in this underground lab at Tulane, as I recall. And it seems totally believable to me that this was going on. I think we do know now they've created viruses for cancer. And indeed, Jack Ruby, said that. He said he was being injected with a fast-acting cancer virus.
Jack Ruby or David Ferrie?
Jack Ruby said that when he was in prison after shooting Oswald, said they were injecting him. And he thought it was a fast-acting cancer virus that would kill him, so he needed to be gotten away from there. And indeed, he died of a fast-acting cancer. And so I don't think it's surprising at all now when you look back on it that they would be researching this and they would use it in such a case. But anyway, this gal, Judith Baker, had to lie low for many, many decades, as you can imagine, because so many people ended up dead around the Kennedy assassination. And she eventually came out, so to speak, and wrote a book called something like Me and Lee. She had an affair with Oswald. And if her story is to be believed, and I grant you that there are skeptics of it, but if her story is to be believed, Oswald was not happy at all about this. He didn't like things like, let's say, the racism in the South. And he didn't like communism, but he didn't like what you could call the kind of ultra-right-wingers who were behind the plots.
He didn't like communism, but he didn't like fascism either.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. He didn't like the fascism that the U.S. was heading into. And according to this gal, Oswald is the one who prevented an assassination attempt on Kennedy in Chicago. And we do have FBI documents and whatever that a high-level source named Lee told them that there was a plot on the president in Chicago and different things happened and so on and so forth, and that therefore they, prevented it or so on and so forth. All I can imagine is in that environment around those people who were involved in the Kennedy assassination, if you were remotely liberal, I don't think you were going to fit in very well. I think they would have seen, I don't know how to put it, but, I'm not sure about McCain. McCain might have been acceptable, but Romney might have been a liberal as far as they were concerned. Right? So you get the general idea, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a possibility that actually he was in that environment because of family and background and whatever, like being able to speak Russian and so on. But he was not of the right mindset. And if indeed he was the Lee who caused the attempt in Chicago to be stopped, well, come on, let's not be naive here. How many Lees are there, right? That are going to be inside sources that are going to get the FBI to change plans and things like that. They're going to have an idea, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
and they would have
totally.
said, and they're not going to be forgiving. They're going to say, that's it. That guy has crossed the line. And so they would want revenge. And so I think that makes a good explanation as to why they would have chosen one of their own to be the Patsy.
It brings to mind what happened with 9/11. I know I'm jumping ahead here a bit, but having all those people in the Pentagon move to that specific area that got struck, right? The people that were investigating the missing money and whatnot.
Yes, indeed. Isn't that the case? It always seems like in the bad organizations that the halfway decent ones are the ones who end up becoming victims.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunate thing. So anyway, we've got this Oswald character, and then he became a lone gunman. Ah, yes. Isn't that great? I guess it's back in those days with cowboy movies. You had to have the image of the lone guy, with his rifle. And it's kind of funny, of course, because the shooting performance was beyond impossible. And then the TV explanation was physically incorrect and impossible. So it was rather hilarious in hindsight.
The good thing about having a lone gunman is if you only have one person, it couldn't have been a conspiracy by definition, right?
Exactly. That's why conspiracies don't exist, is because it's always a lone gunman. By definition. So it's quite funny. And so that's what happened is he became the lone gunman. And the definition of it, there he is. There's the photo of him, the fixed photo of him holding, a rifle in one hand, and I don't know what he held in the other hand, Pravda newspaper or something like that, newspaper. Right?
Yeah, and the shadows don't match up.
Right. And it's kind of, it's almost hilarious that it's like Bin Laden videos where he keeps getting younger and younger, and like now he's awfully fat, boy.
I was going to say which Bin Laden.
I know there are 3 or 4 of them, but it's really kind of painful to watch. But they maintain the story. They swear it's a lone gunman. That's right. He went up there in the library, and there you go. And it's really sad that such a transparent lie can be maintained at all. But I think the thing is, let's face it, it was a fascist takeover, which, by the way, is what Jack Ruby said. He said the form of government was being changed. It wasn't an assassination. It was a change in the form of government. And I think he was right. So we've just been gradually coming out, so to speak. It's more and more obvious that the guys behind that took over. Before that, they had great influence. But then after that, it became, if you speak up and you're important, you end up dead or framed or whatever. You didn't have a chance anymore. So I think he's a really important case in the study of this, because you can see that it's awfully messy and complicated. He might have been, again, a guy who really didn't like what was going on. And that's why he became the Patsy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And as far as the lone gunman thing, well, I just think that became the template. We have impossible shooting performances all over the place, right? We have In the case of Robert Kennedy, you have more bullets fired by far than fit in a pistol, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the list goes on and on. You have shooting performances that no normal person could come remotely close to. In the famous Port Arthur massacre, that again looks like an Olympic level performance by a guy with a 70 IQ who hardly spent any time shooting at the range, right? I mean, that's so ridiculous. It's beyond the imagination. A lot of people, who haven't spent any time with firearms don't realize how much of a skill, practice, various other things, strength, right? And so, in other words, like, let's say shooting from your hip as opposed to from your chest, your shoulder and chest, that kind of thing is very, very hard with something, with a strong rifle. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say is you need special forces kind of guys
Yeah.
to do some of the performances. And a guy who's been to the range 10 times in his life would be lucky to even hit, right? And here you have a guy who can like switch, from one side to the other and use a different type of rifle and things. You got to understand now that's a totally different thing if the size of the bullet is different. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is a lot of people have no familiarity with weapons. And it's kind of like saying, I don't know, maybe here's an example. Oh, I have a friend and he's really good in Tai Chi, right? And then you say in the papers, it says he killed 5 people Thai kickboxing, right? And you'd sit there and say, well, that doesn't work. It has nothing, you know what I mean? Just because you do Tai Chi doesn't make you able to kill people easily with Thai kickboxing. There's something wrong with the story. But the lone gunman idea became really kind of like as I said, it's almost like a trademark in the United States. I don't know. What was it like in Canada? Did they start promoting lone gunmen?
Not so much recently. I mean, Canada, we get along with everybody anyway, right? So nobody has any reason to attack us. I guess that was more in the past. We're starting to see more and more terror activity similar to what you guys have in the United States. But usually up here, it doesn't appear to be the lone gunman. It's usually a plot linked to a terrorist organization. That seems to be the template we're using. And it usually tends to be more than one person, usually a group of people. Although, I mean, we have had shootings with lone gunmen at I think the Women's University quite a few years ago in Montreal. There's a lone gunman went up there and started shooting a bunch of people. Now, whether that was a false event, I don't know. It's possible that one was actually legitimate.
Well, there's the other thing here, I guess we should say, is with the violent movies and the weird drugs they give young people, where the side effects are hallucinations and violence. I mean, there's definitely the chance that you will have true violent lone gunmen.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
I mean, there is no question. These drugs are horrible, and they shouldn't be prescribed in normal situations. Maybe if you lock them up, it's okay, but not if they're walking the streets. That's true. And so, the Montreal case, I'm not really even sure. It looks suspicious, but then I didn't really look into it, so it's hard to say. But I think what you're saying is Canada is now kind of like the States in that there are a lot of manufactured threats, where in the case of the U.S., the FBI or, I don't know, who does it in, is it the CSIS or is it the RCMP?
CSIS and the RCMP, which would be the equivalent of, I guess, the CIA and the FBI.
So probably the RCMP might be the biggest handler, so to speak.
Yeah, precisely.
And, they're more and more integrating the two countries. And, I mean, as an example, as an American, if you fly from Canada to the U.S., in the airport, you can go through American immigration inside Canada.
Yep, exactly.
I mean, I'm just as an example for people who aren't aware of how far along these things are going, and they're integrating border stuff like the Canadian side can now meander around on the U.S. side, and the U.S. side can meander around on the Canadian side, that kind of thing. And so,
they did clamp down a bit during 9/11, though. They started to used to be you could go across, you could drive into the United States from Canada, and you didn't need anything other than, say, your driver's license. But now you need a passport, and I'm sure that just is fitting in with some other agenda, anyhow.
well, problem, reaction, solution, right? That's all an artificial thing to force everyone to biometrics and retina scanning, all that kind of stuff, right? So that was they torture you if you don't do things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, if you don't give up eye scans and fingerprints, life will be very unpleasant in both countries.
Yeah, it seems to be the direction everything's heading.
That's what they're working on. So there's no question about that. Anyway, by the way, an interesting point with the lone gunman is a high percentage of them have three names. They're, at least in the States, they're Lee Harvey Oswald. They're, what was it, Mark David Chapman? I can't even keep them all straight now. It's, again, the United States, and they sometimes do this with serial killers too, but it's almost like it's a, how can I put it? It's a Madison Avenue, the dark side, the MK Ultra side of Madison Avenue, marketing campaign, so to speak, right?
Yeah, it seems like those triple names almost stick in your mind more, don't they?
Yeah, and I think that they know that, and that's why they use them. What was his name? The serial killer, Lee Harvey Lucas, the guy who is attributed with having killed, I don't know what it was, 500 people. So by far the world record in doing that, and he's in a satanic cult, and he's the one guy that Governor Bush of Florida didn't want to see executed in his entire career. So you understand, some woman who shoots her abusive husband, Governor Bush mocked her, right, as she's pleading for, now she's a good Christian and so on and so forth, right? And so he mocks her. But a guy who's killed 5 times more than anybody else in world history, well, I don't think the chair, execution's not right for him. And then that guy's partner was in a similar situation in Florida where there was a different Governor Bush. So this kind of raises questions about our political leadership class and how close they are to...
I'd never heard that. That's scary.
Well, that's not the topic of today, but it does get into this meme of lone gunmen or threats, and they get into your psyche with these 3-letter names, and some of them, you just have to wonder. But yeah, the Dave McGowan's book is the classic on that about serial killers, and I think you will see that a lot of them are, first of all, almost all of them are in satanic cults or dark cults of some kind. And a very high percentage of them have the dark side of government all around them, through them, run by them, that kind of thing. But it's a very long topic. But isn't that amazing? Isn't that you would have such a case and it gets almost no publicity, right? I mean, they could have made mega movies out of this. This could be, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, a guy who does 5 times more than anybody in history, but by far, and he's as evil as they come. You couldn't ask for a better role for an actor, I suppose, or something.
So
and
if it's being suppressed, there's I would guess that there's some type of link. State the obvious, but there's probably some type of link with the elites.
Yes, very strong. And then it might be the Texas elites too, but that's another question. But that's modern America, and hope it's not as bad in Canada. But it's a universal problem in the West. So we have these lone gunmen, and they have 3 names, and then they just for no reason they go kill somebody, and the timing is great, right? Like what's the guy who shot at President Reagan?
I don't know why I can't remember his name right now.
Well, the funny thing, of course, is
Hinckley.
Hinckley, his brother, was meeting with one of President Bush's sons, or they were about to have dinner that night or the next night.
Well, I heard when Reagan got shot that he pulled in his security and stuff, and he was apparently nervous that Bush was trying to replace him, trying to take him out.
Um, I have heard from sources at the hospital there that he essentially ordered, I think it was the Navy. He didn't want the Secret Service around him. He wanted the Navy because he thought
Yeah,
the military, he had a better chance of surviving if the military, because there's also the possibility that what almost killed him wasn't a faraway shot, that it was something done from the Secret Service. But this is a long topic that is hard to get into the details of. Um, I don't know, but I think that Reagan was not, what shall we say, a party man, so to speak, right? If you had heard some of his speeches that he gave over the years, he had like a weekly radio speech. They were very anti-CFR, anti-Rockefeller, anti-oligarchs, anti-New World Order. Now, that doesn't mean you should trust him. I'm not trying to say that, right? I'm just saying that they wouldn't trust him. How's that?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And it is widely reported that, I mean, Reagan swore he would never have Bush as his VP. He swore on the Bible. He said that, I'd rather eat, whatever, glass, right?
Yeah.
And then there are reports from people around him that a week before the choice was made, he was ordered to go see David Rockefeller. And he and his wife went up there, and we don't know what he said, but then Reagan has told his friends.
They must have just preached the virtues of George Bush, I'm sure.
Exactly. And Reagan said that he and his wife had the worst week of their life after that. And that sounds about right, because that's what I imagine a meeting with David Rockefeller to be like. If you're not part of the agenda. And I'm not, this is not meant to make Reagan sound like a great guy. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to say that a lot of people who are extremely, I don't know if you want to put it ideological or religious or something, they see things in a black and white way, in a Manichaean way. And like they look at it and say, well, Kennedy was a rotten guy, so why would anyone kill him? And it's like, but, that's not how they think. From their perspective, you're with the program or you're in the way of the program, right? And he was in the way. He wanted détente. He wanted different things, right, that annoyed a lot of people. He wanted an oil tax. He wanted to have the government issue money that wasn't, Federal Reserve. I mean, there are a whole number of things. I don't think that was the reason, by the way, but I think that the oil tax really, really angered the oil guys. And the peace with the Soviet Union, that angered a lot of people in the military, and it angered the whole military-industrial complex. And, there are reports that Eisenhower was essentially afraid that he was going to be assassinated.
Well, Kennedy also tried to break up the CIA, right? And I mean, he made enemies.
He vowed to break them up, and he went to war with the Mafia. And I'm sure a lot of the Mafia felt this was treason because Kennedy's father was a Mafia guy.
Yeah, he made enemies everywhere, right?
Exactly. I mean, incredibly brave to do this. I mean, most of us would think that you don't want more than one or two enemies at a time, right? And he had like 6 major ones. So, but anyway, getting back to the lone gunman idea, they seem to be marketing campaigns, is what I'm trying to say. They have this theme, they have these pictures, they're rolling them out. In the case of Oswald, they rolled it out too early. In New Zealand, they got the dateline mixed up, and they started, having pictures of him before anybody knew who he was. Right. So they screw up, right? They tell you who the.
You mean like Building 7 falling down before it actually fell down and stuff?
Exactly. It's kind of like, Building 7's falling down, and it's like, well, that's kind of interesting. It's right behind you, lady.
Yeah.
Exactly. They screw up. They're not superhuman, and maybe they are getting lax because they get away with so much, right? And so anyway, we can move on to some other lone gunmen now. I mean, I just mentioned a few and see if you've thought about them at all. But Sirhan Sirhan, any thoughts on that, on him?
I know he was involved apparently with Rosicrucianism, and he had been keeping dream diaries, and again, there's those ties to those occult societies, right? And you have to wonder if they're using that for some type of MK Ultra program or Monarch programming. I don't know.
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence that he was out of his mind in a way that's not normal.
Yeah.
So I think he's a likely candidate for a mind control, victim kind of thing. In addition to that, he simply couldn't have done it and didn't do it, right? You have all kinds of reasons if you look into this, but the Los Angeles Police Department, from way back, has been a very CIA infiltrated, and I would argue run, institution. And so they gathered up all the evidence and they ignored the stuff they didn't want, like the polka dot dress woman running out saying, whatever, we got him, that kind of thing. So he was also, of course, like a Palestinian, right?
I think I'd heard that, yeah.
Well, so now we get into another convenient meme for the powers that be.
Demonization.
Radical, crazy, Arab, Muslim, Palestinian.
Yeah.
Good old, victimized Israel because their enemies are crazy. And now that may have played better then than now. But that's just an example is they like to get multiple gains out of things.
Oh, exactly. Right? Yeah.
It's not like there's one purpose behind when they do these things. They might have 2, 3, 4, 5 purposes. And I'm just saying, in that case, he was a perfect patsy. Perfect and all. He couldn't even defend himself coherently. He didn't even know what he'd been doing. Right? He couldn't even say, what do you think you were doing? Because he couldn't answer. It's like, I don't know what I was. I don't know where I was. And the Palestinian thing, well, not trying to get into Middle Eastern politics, but certainly you can see that from the perspective of the military-industrial complex, the whole build up Israel, the whole tension with the Arab world is a profit center. There's hundreds of billions of dollars to be made. So that's another angle is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You really just have to look into the case, but it's obvious that Sirhan Sirhan didn't do it, couldn't have done it, wasn't close, no way. And it's in some ways even more ridiculous than the President Kennedy case. So that's another one that you can look at and kind of bite into and say, geez, this is so transparently ridiculous, right? I mean, you don't even need a brain. I mean, a kid could look at it and just say, no way, right? Okay, so that's another one. And unfortunately, that whole period of time set the U.S. and allied countries on a very dark path. The assassinations really damaged the country. And by the way, a lot of people think that this is good liberals were victims, right? And they were, but there's a lot more to it than that. Because, for example, Governor Wallace was threatening the political status quo. And he was like a populist, conservative, Democrat kind of type at that time. And he was shot up and paralyzed. Are you familiar with this, Oolong?
No, I'm not actually.
Well, he was threatening the plan. He might have prevented, very good chance he would have prevented Nixon from winning. And it's the same story, the usual, the 8 bullets from one pistol kind of thing. You know what I mean? Just another classic case. And my point is he wasn't a liberal is what I'm trying to say. There, in that period of time from, let's say, the early 60s to the mid-70s, a whole bunch of political figures got taken out in one way or another. Not all lone gunmen. Some were car accidents or plane crashes.
Yeah, there was actually, I can't remember the fellow's name, but it was maybe 10 years ago or something, and he was an anti-establishment politician, and his plane ended up crashing. Might have had something to do with the Franklin.
Wellstone? Right,
yeah,
Wellstone?
that's it. Yeah, it had something to do with the Franklin scandal.
Well, I think the reason that he was taken out, he was an honest guy.
Yeah.
And by honest, what I mean is he said what he thought and voted how he thought. He was a progressive liberal kind of guy from Minnesota, But what I'm saying is he wasn't working for the CIA or working for the different lobbies and, factions that we normally think of. In other words, he really actually believed and fought for what he believed in. And he was against the Iraq War. And Vice President Cheney told him and threatened him, actually, and said, you are going to pay. Because his vote was a crucial vote. It was like almost a tie. And his vote, damaged them at different times. And we have that. We have it on the floor of the Senate where Cheney said, USOB, you're going to pay. So I think that, yes, he was taken out. And we just don't know who. But indeed, he was a well-intentioned liberal, and he was in the way. But I do want to point. But there have been. What I'm trying to say, though, is there have been plenty of decent conservatives who were not on the payroll of the CIA or whoever, and their planes crashed, or car crashed, or various other things. They're just not usually as well known. I mean, nothing can compare with the two Kennedys.
I think Perot apparently. I've heard that he was threatened too, and he was, because he was going to unseat Bush Sr. And he was terrified, and that's why he dropped out of the race.
Yes, I've heard that his daughter was threatened.
Yeah,
and that makes perfect sense. I mean, that's what they do. Is a lot of us, as you get older, you're actually not so concerned about yourself. It's like your grandkids.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're 65 years old and they threaten to kill you, it's like, well, okay, but maybe I've only got 10 years left anyway. And I care about the future of the country. That's true. But what about your grandkids, right? So we've got all these lone gunmen, but the point is they're really just one part of the story. They're the way to intimidate and remove political figures. But you see, in the past, they didn't have plane crashes so much, and they didn't have car crashes. So lone gunmen were more important. I mean, back in the day, 100, 200 years ago, I think, let's see, President Jackson was, I think one assassin had two guns, and one misfired and the other one didn't kill him, kind of thing. And the bullet stayed in his body the rest of his life, kind of thing. And so the gunmen were more important in the past because they didn't have plane crashes and high-tech weapons and whatever, Now they have some rare poison and that gives you a heart attack, and it just says you had a heart attack, right?
Yeah.
And they're doing that more now than guns. I mean, the political guy Breitbart in the U.S., who really, from a conservative perspective, was causing all kinds of damage. I think he was murdered, and then the guy who witnessed, what happened? The coroner was murdered quickly after, and then a guy who witnessed the thing went in hiding.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That was an obvious hit. And then recently, this Rolling Stones journalist, Hastings, where his car blows up, but his engine's in pristine shape 50 yards away or whatever, right? That's another, the remote control car is a new modern form of the lone gunman. It's like God intervened and just made it happen with magic.
Yeah, but I think even some people say the Princess Diana car crash may have been some type of remote tampering.
Oh, I think that's quite likely. That's one of the drawbacks of making equipment high-tech is that you don't control it anymore. Anyway, so in the past we had more of these guys, like Huey Long, Governor Long. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he could have really shaken the system. He was a very popular populist governor in Louisiana, and he could easily have won the presidency. In my view, he was a better version of FDR. The usual, the bankers and oil boys gunned him down, if you ask me. But the usual story, a lone gunman who, for no particular reason, just felt like being a lone gunman that day, right? You know the story, right? And they also, by the way, get people, I think in that case, they get people who have very serious illnesses and very serious debts, right? I mean, if you owe $1 million to the Mafia and they say, look, we're going to kill you if you don't pay, and they say, hey, there's a way out, right? We'll give you $2 million if you go do something, right? Well, you may go to prison for 25 or 30 years, but at least your family gets an extra $1 million out of the deal, and they don't get, right? So it's looking like a winning deal to people who are in a truly desperate situation. Now, by the way, these patsies and lone gunmen are not just the United States. They're all over. Everybody wants to get on in the act, right? They want to copy America. And so, right?
Yep, indeed.
Yeah. I mean, if it works for criminals in the U.S., why won't it work for criminals in somewhere else? So I can think of one. Are you familiar with the murder of Yitzhak Rabin?
Yep. He
So,
was assassinated by an Israeli soldier. Well, so the story goes.
exactly, the story. He was killed by a lone gunman.
Yeah.
Right? A dirty right-winger at a peace march or something or other, peace something or other, right? Sure. The evidence is overwhelming that that guy didn't do it. The whole thing's a setup. It was to get rid of Rabin. Now, I don't have much good to say about Rabin. I don't, In
comparison to Netanyahu.
But compared to Perez or Netanyahu, I think, or some of the others, he was again less bad. He's more rational in the sense that, you know what I mean. You could kind of cut some. I don't think we would be having this drive for risking a very, very serious war in the Middle East if you had Rabin calling shots. Now, I'm not saying I like him. I'm not really saying I like the Kennedys or Wallace or whoever. I'm just trying to say put it in relative perspective.
The lesser of two evils, more or less.
Yeah, and in fairness to these guys, they're in impossible situations. Yeah. All governments are run by criminal factions, right? So, being realistic about it, it's hard for them to be decent when you've got so much pressure to do bad. But anyway, Barry Chamish, the famous Israeli conspiracy researcher and journalist, wrote a book on this, and it just demolishes the whole case. And the interesting thing in this case is that essentially the conspiracy theory version became quite mainstream fairly quickly. Were you aware of that?
I remember when it happened. I remember, it being quite out there. But I think it was also during the when the internet was first starting up too, right? So I think it was getting some momentum from that.
Yes, but I think what really did it is Barry Chamish's work, and Israel being a small country, it was much easier to kind of get the word out, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, a small country like that, it's kind of like talking about Belgium or something. I mean, you're only 3 people away in conversation from the prime minister.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're not that far away in a small country, right? It's like in your county or not province, but your equivalent of, the American county or something like that. You tell somebody who tells somebody who tells somebody, and the word is all around. And the story never made sense anyway. So it's an interesting study because so many people fairly quickly came to realize that it was a whole, a story of lies in whole cloth. And I think that is another case where I think you have modernizing countries who are copying the American system. They don't need, how can I put it? A difference now compared to the past is the rise of media power, like television, and how many people watch television. So the television story is now reality in a lot of the world. And that wasn't the case, obviously, let's say 50 years ago in most of the world. But now they need a movie, they need a script, they need a story, right?
Yeah, that's what always happens. There's always the made-for-TV drama, right?
And it's getting more and more like that, like this Boston bombing, right?
Yeah, it's just ridiculous, the whole thing.
A total story.
Yeah,
and
you've got a guy with his leg literally blown off who, would have bled to death within a minute or two, and he's, you can still see signs of good blood circulation in him. leg bone sticking out looks like a total prosthetic. You know, it's just outrageous. Max Malone has done quite a few exposés, and he's just demolished the official story.
Well, lots of people have, because that's so ridiculous. And by the way, not only would he be dead in a few minutes, but I mean, they wheeled him back and forth for the cameras, you know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I've seen that.
And that whole thing was a theatrical production. I mean, I don't know, maybe a few people were injured or even died in what we didn't see. However, I'm skeptical because the bombing, there were like two major bombings there. The one they focus on is one thing, but the other one, they haven't shown much. But what we can see of it is it was totally staged theatrically too. And maybe the reason they didn't focus on that is because certain camera photos of it were particularly revealing, that showed the setup and, you know, how they were like rolling out the equipment, you know, making the move, so to speak. So maybe that's why they kind of abandoned that one. But it's conceivable that somebody got hurt somewhere or even died. But nonetheless, it's clearly a 90% Hollywood production, if not more.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And then the Patsies. Now we get into the science of Patsies. So who are the Patsies?
You're asking me the question?
Yep, Chechen brothers, right?
Oh, okay, in Boston, yeah. Yeah,
supposedly.
Conveniently from Chechnya.
Now, what's interesting is I think, maybe you have a different view, I think they didn't want to use those as patsies. I think they wanted to use a right-wing, conservative, pro-Islam, which is ridiculous, guy, right? I think they wanted to go after cowboy Al-Qaeda, cowboys who like Al-Qaeda. And so that would be somebody like Alex Jones, or which is so ridiculous.
They wanted, basically what they wanted to do was go after the Patriot, you know, the Patriot right wing type. I mean, even the type of bomb they use, like a pressure cooker bomb, it just sounds like a homemade, made in the USA type device. You know what I mean? Like, whereas you would expect if these guys were with some terrorist group, you would expect that they would have access to something better than a friggin' pressure cooker.
Well, they should have, because they were working for the CIA, right? Should be able to do better than a pressure cooker if you're tied in with Graham Fuller. Geez, you know, some people don't know, but the Chechen, the elder brother, who's the one who's really the obvious CIA operative type, the family married into Graham Fuller. Graham Fuller is a key underground character. Iran-Contra, you name it. Every dark scandal that the dark side of government in the U.S. has been involved in the last 35 years, there he is, right? Yeah. So to be married into that family, wow,
was it their Uncle Aslan or something like that?
Yeah. Now, families have fights, and I don't know who's doing what, but clearly this elder brother traveling around Russia is a CIA guy trying to stir up the Muslims and do so on and so forth. And you might ask, well, then why do the Russians let him in? And the answer is because they're tracking him. They want to see where he goes. So it's one of those cat and mouse kind of spy games. But the interesting point, though, is I think they didn't want to use these guys as patsies. I think they had their plans for cowboys. And I think it was blown because there were so many camera shots and so many questions and people asking questions, and they couldn't get their stories right or straight. And the guy named Dan Badandi was really causing them trouble at press conferences and whatever, showing pictures. And I think they panicked, to be honest. I think whoever controls these things panicked and said, we've totally lost the narrative. This thing could turn into the worst catastrophe imaginable. So what can we do to shut it down? And to shut it down, the easiest thing is take something under your control that's a Muslim. And that'll shut everybody up. It'll shut the liberals up. It'll shut the conservatives up. And then we just go into the manhunt stage, and the whole media complex will go after the manhunt. At least that's what I think. Mm-hmm.
Do you think, I mean, I'm wondering when they pull one of these off, do you think they get 2 or 3? I would assume they've got contingency plans for everything, right? You know, in case something goes wrong. They've probably got 3 or 4 different possible angles they could play the story, and this was probably one of the contingency plans.
Oh, I think this was Plan C or Plan D. I don't even think it was Plan B. Um,
It was sloppy. It was really sloppy.
As I said, I think they panicked. I think they got desperate, and this was the only thing that they could easily grab, because I don't think they really war game Plan D very much. I think they spent almost all of their time on A and B, and so once you get down to like, oh shit, what do we do? Well, then it's, I mean, because I don't think you would want to pick a guy who's married to Graham Fuller. You know what, fam? That is like you weren't ready properly, as far as I'm concerned. No, I think they had a couple of options first. I think the cowboy, and then they also had the some of the guys there. I think they had more. They had guys running around. They had
the Kraft International guys.
The Kraft guys. I think they had several. And just from the narrative they were trying to push out it changed dramatically in like 48 hours. But I'm just saying, there's a period where it quickly switched from cowboy to what was the second version? It only lasted like 5 hours, but they had a second version where they were trying to see if the idea would fly at all, and it didn't. And then they just, they started to panic at some point, and they had a different story. It's like they had, I'm forgetting now, but it's kind of like Homeland Security and the FBI had different versions of things at about the same time. And anyway, they lost total control of the narrative, is what I'm trying to say. And you could see it. They couldn't answer questions decently. Dan Bidandi was causing them tremendous grief. And I think they just really just said, look, the different chains of command here don't know what to do. We don't know which lie to go with, right? And we need an executive decision. And so it went to whoever makes executive decisions high up. And I think they just panicked and said, look, how do we cut our losses?
Yeah. Let's throw a couple Muslims to the sharks.
And they don't give a damn about some Chechen. They got a bunch of them. I mean, they're like 100,000 Chechens in the U.S. or something, and they're all working for intelligence agencies and in the family. Not all people, but I mean, they all have, it was a brutal war, and the U.S. had been funding and stirring up the Chechens forever. And so they were on the U.S. payroll, a lot of them. And so they can afford to lose a couple. They don't care. I just think it's the family connection to Graham Fuller that's very embarrassing for them. So this is a positive development, though. They totally lost control of the narrative. They didn't know what to do. They tried different lies. They had to do all kinds of things that were really, truly embarrassing. And so this is a positive development. I don't think I can ever remember them losing control of the narrative like this.
So here's what I'm worried about, though. Obviously, a lot of these victims are just, again, like we've discussed before, it's just Hollywood, right? There's either no victims or very few victims compared to what we're led to believe. My concern is the next time they do this, and there's going to be a next time, because it's just the way they operate, and it's all they can think of. So my concern is the next time they do this, they're going to do it for real.
Well, by real, you mean like actually kill thousands?
Yeah, precisely.
Well, I'm going to get into something more speculative. I'm going to say that I think these people in higher places are black, dark magician types. And not all of them. I realize that for money, they do things, and CIA guys just like mayhem. Right, I understand that, but I'm just saying at the level where the executive decisions are made, I think they're kind of more like eyes wide shut ceremony types, and serious students of Aleister Crowley and things like that. I think they're serious as a heart attack at the higher levels, and I think it's more a question that they care about certain ritual dates and astrological things and energies that.
Speaking of that, I've heard before that the Kennedy, I can't remember the author, but that the Kennedy assassination is related to an occult Sun King sacrifice or something to that effect. Have you ever heard that theory?
Sure. The killing of the king. The theory that secret societies have a few goals to bring in the new era that they want, and one is the killing of the king ritual. Another is the transmutation of matter, which they see as the nuclear explosion and so on as having achieved. And the other is bringing the heavens to the earth, which would be bringing moon rocks back. And that those were the three goals that they had set sometime in the past, 100 years ago or whenever, or perhaps more, perhaps 1,000 years ago or more. There is that theory, and certainly it was the killing of President Kennedy was done in a very ritualistic manner if you look into it. The location, all kinds of things about it had a very, very dark ritualistic element to them. So that's certainly possible. And there are researchers in this, like Michael Hoffman goes into a lot of the revelation of the method theory that they want you to know. They want your subconscious to know they did it. And that's why they have such transparent lies, right? With something like the bin Laden story or the Kennedy story. I mean, an 8-year-old can tell you it's a lie at top to bottom.
Yeah.
Right? It's only an adult who can say it's true because you've been brainwashed properly.
So he thinks, okay, so why does he think that they want to reveal the method?
Well, there are different reasons. One is it's the occult. We're in the period where the dark side is coming out of the closet. Okay, so Madame Blavatsky talked about the externalization of the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And what that means is the dark side, the Satanist types or whatever you want to call some of these folks, the dark side of different secret societies, they hid themselves for a long time. And they're not hiding themselves anymore. They're coming out more and more. If you look, it was not remotely so visible 30 years ago, for example, or 50 years ago. Now, I know you can say that's because of the internet, but I don't think it's simply that. I think it's that they are coming out of the closet. They are saying that, yes, we have dead bodies all around the Queen's estates throughout Britain, right? You know what I mean? They're not hiding it. They could hide that. You think that could be in the papers if they didn't let it? Are you kidding? That's impossible, right? And they're even saying other things like Benjamin Franklin's house in
had all the bodies
had
in
all
the basement.
kinds of like skeletons of young people. Oh, and we date them from when he was there. Oh, well, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. I'm just trying to say that I think that the internet is helping a lot and it's waking people up, but I think we do need to be realistic that the bad guys are intentionally coming out of the closet.
Well, I think too there may be. My theory has always been that there's, some people say they just want to tell you what they're doing so they can laugh at you, which to me just seems a bit absurd. My theory has always been that they have to sort of tell it like it's sort of like making a deal with the devil. The devil will write the contract up, and he'll write it in such a way that you agree to something that you don't realize you're agreeing to. So essentially, when they reveal these things, if we're not wise enough to see what's going on, then essentially we're agreeing to our own servitude or whatever, right?
Yes, sure. But I mean, that's also the concept of free will, the belief in free will. And it's also that mocking is only part of it. When you say mocking, there's the secondary aspect of it. It's like they're saying that a very high percentage of people are not awake, that they're just sheep or they're just cows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying this is fair, but I'm just saying that is a widespread belief in elite and dark circles. And if you can't see it, right? If you can't see at this point that vaccines are harmful, you're just not able to see.
Then they think you probably you deserve to whatever you get.
Yes, you deserve it as far as they're concerned. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? If you can't see the obvious. And so when they do something like 9/11 and it has, I don't know, 10 physical impossibilities all over the place, right? If not 100. If you can't recognize that, well, then what is the saying in the Bible about none are so blind as those refuse to see, and none are so deaf as those who refuse to hear. I mean, sorry, it's your own fault as far as they're concerned. So I think they feel ethically like they are being fair, right?
Yeah,
In other words, let me give you an example. To take the vaccine example, the evidence is overwhelming and all over the place that you should not give young infants vaccines. Now, it's a little bit more of a difficult story with older, ages and certain specific vaccines, but you shouldn't be giving 30 or 40 ridiculous vaccines to a baby who's 1 month old, and they have these adjuvants like mercury and just endless terrible things, monkey kidney, just endless stuff, right? There's overwhelming evidence that this is not what you want to do. If you can't see that, then I mean, that's their perspective, I think. So I think that's an additional aspect of this, is they believe that the stupid and the weak are meant to serve, and serve includes die, by the way, if necessary.
Yeah.
Right. So that's their perspective on life. I'm not saying it's good or anything. I'm just saying that that's where they're coming from. But in addition to that, I think they're not hiding themselves anymore. I just don't think you could get stuff like, dead bodies on the Queen's estate. I just don't think that that's possible, that anyone can have that in the papers unless it's permitted. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but I just think it's more controlled than that.
Yeah, you're probably right.
So anyway, that's an additional aspect of this. They are moving towards a big event, I think. But I don't know if it'll be real or if it'll be fake. And by fake, I mean 90% fake. I mean, certainly what I'm saying is, okay, the U.S. seems to be, or the forces in the West, let's put it that way, the forces in the West who are trying to rearrange the Middle East have been running into a lot of problems the last few years. I think the military return in Egypt is a huge problem for them. Obviously, Syria was like the cornerstone of the whole thing, the linchpin, and now it looks like they're losing and are going to have to accept their loss in Syria. Well, what are they going to do? I don't know, but one option for them is a huge attacks inside the U.S. and possibly other major countries like Britain.
Or Israel.
Yes, but that's a different case, because that would get into the question of Israel militarizing more and using it as an excuse to invade Lebanon, which they want to do, and they want to try a rematch against Hezbollah. And that might happen, but that would not change, let's say, the U.S. and Canada or something, Australia, that much.
Right.
So that might happen, but it's, to me, a separate question. The bigger question is, let's say 5 small-scale supposed nukes go off, right? Pick your place, wherever. Chicago, Toronto.
Detroit. Might as well get rid of Detroit.
Get rid of Detroit. It's the rebuilding of Detroit. They hate our freedoms, so they're going to bomb our Dresden, right? That's it. They hate our freedoms, and Dresden has to go. Well, okay, let's say they do that. Like you're saying, they've kind of got 2 choices. They could actually use real ones and kill hundreds of thousands of people or whatever, right? At least tens of thousands, right? They could do that, or they could use 95% fake and, only kill 5,000, but say it's 100, right?
Like, essentially what
in
they
the
do.
In the confusion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, essentially, in my opinion, I think that's what happened with 9/11. I think a lot of the people they say died, I know people did die, quite a few, but I think a lot of the people that they said died were just fictions.
Yeah, I think so too, but I don't know the percentage. Maybe half, maybe 2/3. I don't know. But certainly a lot of real people died, and of course,
yeah.
firemen and everybody. I mean, no question about it. I'm just saying as a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you looked at the numbers and find out they have numerological meanings for the dark guys. I mean, you see these patches and memorial things, and they've got very New World Order-y, they're very dark humor.
Yeah.
And that's just too tough to go into on the air. You'd have to see the actual patches and memorial statues and things like that. But you can tell they're making fun of us in a dark, dark way. But sure. So in other words, just a grand version of 9/11, something 10 times bigger, let's say, right? Or maybe even more. Maybe 2 or 3 9/11s in different places. And depending on the politics, they might want to bring in another country, like, let's say, Britain. Right. That's certainly possible. I wouldn't rule it out, but I just think that it's hard for us to relate to their thinking because, as I said, on a fire festival day, they want burning, and they want real burning. They want real people dying, right? But then maybe on some festival is more of a what shall we say, like a day of magic.
Or Day of Illusions or something like that.
A Day of Illusions or something. And then that would be the kind of day where they wouldn't do anything. It would just be all Hollywood. So it's just a little tricky for us we just can't know what they would want to do because they now have the ability to do all of the above. But having said that, my bigger point was their Middle Eastern project may be running into a wall. It looks like it to me. We could debate that, but that's what it looks like to me. So, if they can't get what they want there, what do you think they'll do? And I think they're going to be sorely tempted to say, okay, the game is going against us, right? A lot of media around the world are talking about false flags now, and I mean major media, right? I mean, when you have Putin putting an editorial in the New York Times about Al-Qaeda perhaps attacking Israel, saying that the Syrian government did it,
he's tipping his hat, right? He essentially is saying that's probably was their next step. So he's kind of calling their bluff.
Well, he's certainly saying you haven't got the guts to do it. Because
speaking of which, have you heard that the latest is John McCain wants to write a reply to Pravda?
Yes, I've heard that, and I just have to laugh because, well, first of all, I think, as Putin said, you need to have sympathy for Senator McCain because nobody could have his mind function properly after years in a pit where he gets abused, right? Now, Putin knows, as well as I hope a lot of our listeners know, that that's not what happened to McCain. He immediately sold out his fellow POWs, and because his father was a top admiral and all that, he wanted to do anything it took to get on good terms, and he did not suffer at all. He was treated well. It's all a PR campaign to create him as some tough maverick, the whole PR thing. And his wife is a mafia daughter, top mafia guy's daughter. So he's, to me, like the lowest of the low.
Yeah.
But what can he say? How do you respond to Putin's thing? What's he going to say? America created and runs Al-Qaeda, and it's a good thing. Well, okay, you could say that. What else is he going to say? You know what I mean? He can't say anything. What's he going to say? He can say Assad is not a nice man. Okay, well, okay, that's possible. Okay, I'll buy that. But I mean, you know what I mean? There's nothing you can say that's reasonable as far as I'm concerned. And so I think what he'll do is try to sell something that doesn't convince a single Russian.
Yeah, totally.
It will be an emotional appeal to Americans, and it'll say America is exceptional, right? Because we, and then fill in the blanks, whatever. We ended slavery decades later than others, right? Or, no, I'm just kidding, right? I don't want to be mean, but you know what I mean. America is special because of its power and economic size and a number of things, and the ideals that, do make it somewhat different in the sense it was founded on ideals, supposedly, right? And so I'm not trying. I'm an American. I'm not against America. I just think that it's a bit ludicrous. First of all, if McCain is the best you can do, you're in deep, deep trouble, right? You know what I mean? I mean, I would rather have anybody write the paper than McCain. He may get knocked out. He went to a what do you call these town hall?
Town hall. Yeah, I've seen that.
And it's like, so some, I guess she's a Christian Syrian woman, was there saying, her cousin had just been killed by these Al Qaeda lunatics that you love so much, and you went into Syria with them and get your pictures taken with Al Qaeda, right? And you should be embarrassed and rot in hell. And then that guy who looked like a really strong young guy is saying, you need to be arrested and tried for treason. I mean, nothing sort of a treason trial is proper for you.
Yeah, it seemed like if he didn't have Secret Service there, they would have probably drug him out back and lynched him, I think.
Well, there's that, but also the fact that this is on TV, YouTube kind of thing. And, well, what can I say? There's a bit of an awakening going on, and McCain might even be impeached, essentially, because, I mean, look, he's a guy who goes and gets his picture taken with Al Qaeda. Right? I mean,
they're freedom fighters now. They're not Al Qaeda.
The freedom fighters, yes, with freedom fighters, right? And so that's not really politically as smart as he might have thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, he might have thought he was looking brave. I'm in the front lines. I just entered Syria illegally, and I've got Al Qaeda to the right of me, and I've got some other lunatic group to the left of me, and aren't I brave? Right? But that's not the way the American public look at it. Right? Right? You being with a leader of Al Qaeda is not impressive to me at all. Sorry. You shouldn't be a senator. You should be wherever Putin said you need more treatment, more therapy.
Again, it's like you said, they've lost control of the narrative. So, they can't spin things the way they used to.
Right. And as I said, the world is talking about false flags now.
Yeah.
And I mean mainstream media around the world. And so this is a big deal. And this latest thing with the chemical weapons, I think, was a big mistake on their part. They don't have any follow-up, and they didn't set it up properly. I mean, they're so incompetent nowadays. It's embarrassing. But I guess we should get back to the Patsy lone gunman kind of thing, because there are some others that we might get into. I like the Port Arthur one as a story, but why don't you tell me about anything from Canada? Give me a story from Canada.
Well, I can tell you the latest one, which was a few months ago, and you'll get a kick out of the guy's name. His name was John Nuttall, N-U-T-A-L.
John Nuttall.
And sometimes I think the universe is just playing a cosmic joke with some of the names of these people, or maybe not, right, as the case may be, who knows. But anyway, the guy was like a complete meth head. He was in a heavy metal satanic type band. Apparently, him and his wife decided to convert to Islam last year. And then apparently they thought it was a good idea to create some pressure cooker bombs and leave them on the British Columbia legislature steps on Canada Day. So this came out in the media, and the whole thing just stinks to high heavens. Like when you look at the press release from the RCMP, it's discussing the bombs never could have hurt anyone, and essentially you can just tell by how it's written and how they worded the press releases that these guys were coached. I mean, they couldn't have built these bombs. I don't even think they could have put a house together out of Lego, right? So they essentially had people coaching them and telling them how to do it, and the whole thing is just designed and staged to. I don't know if this almost seems like. The people are white, they're not Islamic, so it's just really bizarre. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, you see, that's because they've decided that, by they, I mean the powers that be, have decided that they need, like in the book 1984, they need enemies that don't even have any reason, right? They don't exist, right? We're now moving to that stage of 1984 where we have fictional groups attacking the government, and they're not. They don't exist. If anything, they're trying to search and go fishing for patsies, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And the patsy quality is really declining. I mean, they're just like he hates your freedom in Canada. He hates Canada. That's why he did it. You see, right? That's their argument. It's because he hated Canada. That's why he did it. Don't you see? Right? It's just so ridiculous, right? That no concrete reason, no hope to do anything constructive, right? So I think it's embarrassing. 100 years ago, they used anarchists, and, we've had like presidents assassinated, and these were what can I say, political things orchestrated by the oligarchs and such, or British intelligence or whatever. But it's how can I put it? But at least these were real groups. You know what I mean? They were funded by like British intelligence or somebody, but they did exist, right? And they did try to radicalize people. You know what I'm trying to say?
We're going from the James Bond type villains to like the I don't even know what these guys would be, like
comic book
Pee Wee Herman type villains. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean you look at them and it's like I mentioned this Somalian kid, and it's like he's not a threat to a squirrel. I don't think he's a threat to our society. What is this?
Yeah.
He wouldn't be able to do anything if the FBI didn't give him bombs. So they hate your freedom in Canada too. I'm really sad to hear that, but somehow it's not surprising. And let me guess, the pressure cooker was the pressure cooker on top of a Canadian flag or something? I mean, were they allowed to do the photo ops?
Well, yeah, it's interesting you say that, because this broke the day after Canada Day, right? Which is July 1st, which is essentially would be similar to your 4th of July. But the interesting thing is people have gone up and looked at the case dockets, and the arrests and whatnot are from weeks and months before. So again, there's these little things that don't add up, and the people that knew them say, it just, the whole story with these people just doesn't make any sense, right?
I got a comment about that. This is a very important point you make. And that is the stories are becoming more and more fictional. So we gave the example, you talked about Max Malone and his very interesting videos of fakery all over the place, right? Technical fakery.
Yeah.
That's an issue. But another thing is they are now flagrantly lying about things that they would not have lied about in the past. So in the past, they would have arrested somebody like Oswald on a certain day. They would have arrested him on July 4th, right? So that later they would say he was arrested on July 4th, right? And if a journalist, and there used to be guys, although they frequently called them newsmen back then. Journalism is this thing they teach in fancy universities. But they would look and they'd say, yeah, he was arrested on July 4th and he had this with him. He had some money. His ID said this, that kind of thing, right? Now it's just fake. They don't even bother to arrest the guy on July 4th. They just say they did.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people that are doing essentially online forensics, and people are turning up Facebook pages that were created days before the events happen, and there's all kinds of examples of this.
Yeah, they're registered. They're registering the web page before the event.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, fundraising for Boston Marathon victims. Before the marathon bombings. And
just in case something might happen, you never know, right?
Right. It's like totally ridiculous. So you could say they're getting arrogant and sloppy. That's one way of looking at it. You could say a lot of things, but it's definitely an interesting phenomenon. And one thing this means, though, unfortunately for us, is that we can't treat information as reliably as we could in the past. Okay? Just because something, it used to be if something was in the New York Times, you could basically take it as a given that it was true, let's say 30 years ago. Now, the purpose was to lie, but the actual facts would be true.
Right.
Okay, that's no longer the case. Okay, if they say this guy was arrested on July 1st, maybe not. If they say actually anything nowadays, you just can't trust these guys, and this is terrible because it used to be they did their lying with yellow journalist type sheets, scandal things, the newspapers that have pictures of aliens and out of shape celebrities and stuff. Right?
Inquire.
Yeah, the Weekly World News and things like that, right? And by the way, I for some period of time was a friend of a guy working at one of those. They had rules as to how they told the truth and lies and which names to use and how to lie about with numbers and various other things. It's a pretty sophisticated operation.
Now, I've heard before that some of them are actually run by intelligence groups.
Yeah, well, I think the lower level is Mafia. I think the Mafia run them. But then I think above that, they're controlled or somehow used by the intelligence agencies. But I think as a daily practical matter, they're Mafia operations. And wouldn't you know it, they're in Florida. Getting back to that point about never underestimate Florida.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they're lying to us now in a shameless way, including the New York Times or the National Post, the one in Toronto? Oh, no, it's the Globe and Mail is the one I'm thinking about.
I was just going to say our main ones, yeah, the Globe and Mail.
The Globe and Mail I'm thinking about. I was thinking of another paper. And in other words, that used to be a very staid, respectable, boring establishment kind of paper. And at some point it changed, and now it's just whatever's a convenient lie is what they throw out there. And that's happened throughout the whole Western world. And so this is kind of interesting. We can no longer trust their information. It used to be you could actually trust these rotten criminals. So if they told you a guy was arrested, if they told you his height, they told you his hair color, they told you these things, you could trust it, and you no longer can. And what that means is some of the research and evidence that comes out there has problems because people assumed something was true when it wasn't. Okay? So, for example, are you familiar with the Port Arthur massacre in Australia?
Not very. I mean, I think I've heard of it, but I've never really looked into it a whole lot.
Okay, so you know where Port Arthur is and what it was, right?
Nope. It's not
okay.
ringing a bell.
It's in Tasmania, the island, the big island off of Australia, and it was like the original penal colony when Britain decided that they needed to transportate their criminals or riffraff or whatever, right? Or they needed to clear out the highlands and stuff like that, whatever their evil plots were and reasons were, right?
Right.
And so that was a slave, penal colony kind of place, right? And it's a very isolated place. And today it's a very, very isolated place, really. And it's a historical place. I've been there. I went there, I don't know, a few years after the event, a couple years after the event. And by the way, the people were, in my mind, scared and a very, very bad mood over that place. And I'm not talking from I'm talking from the modern problem, not from the historical legacy. And I think there's a reason for that. I think they know. But anyway, and so a guy with an IQ of 70, and that's another classic Patsy thing, a guy who could hardly think straight if he tried.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not trying to pick on people. I'm just saying that's, what he was. And he supposedly did this Olympic scale performance of gunning people down. I mean, just, top guy in special forces couldn't match it, right? He should be leading Spetsnaz. And so he does all this, right? And then he goes into this building and calls the cops and says, "I'm your man, don't burn me down." And they're burning down the building. And various other things are going. Like 30-some people were gunned down. And by the way, the bullet shooting performance is one of those like unbelievable cases of, 32 kills with 28 bullets. I mean, really, impressive kind of shooting in a very short period of time, too. Well, so you have this guy inside the building calling the cops, and it's, "Don't kill me." And, at the time and later, I just assumed, okay, so that's the guy, right? That's the Patsy. But, there are researchers now who are saying there's actually evidence that the Patsy, there were two of them. And it's a complicated case, and you can search on the internet for things. There's something called a critical study of that massacre or whatever. It may be that, you see, we've never been able to hear from the guy who pleads guilty. We don't even know. The pictures of him may have been altered. We're not sure really what's going on. The official story is he got a new girlfriend like 3 months before the shooting, but we've got nothing about her, no evidence. You know what I mean? It's just very, very suspicious, to put it mildly. But what I wanted to try to say is I'd always assumed there was one guy, and it's actually now possible there were two. And this changes the whole calculations of what was going on. And I guess if you're thinking about, let's say, Oswald, if you just always figured there was one Oswald and then somebody comes out, like there's that book of the two Oswalds with all the photographic and other evidence, it's like a huge investigation into Oswald. And it's, in my mind, overwhelmingly proves that there were at least two. It kind of sets you back and you have to say, geez, I didn't expect them to lie so flagrantly, but now they are. And
just getting worse and worse.
Yeah, but what it means is you are now having to assume, like, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, let's take the Boston bombing. You'd say that they call a doctor. Well, now I would have in the past assumed the guy was a real doctor, right? Because they can just hire doctors, right? They got some doctor working for them at the local, what was the Israeli hospital that a lot of the stuff was going on in Boston. But now you have to say, this guy may not be a doctor. He may not even be a real person. The name may not even be real, right? If you call the hospital, that guy may not exist. Dr. Stanley Monteith, a conspiracy show host for, I don't know, 30 years or something, was an orthopedic surgeon. So he's quite familiar with amputations and things like that. And he says the whole story is impossible. But he called the hospital where they said, here's the surgeon. And it's kind of like, well, we don't have a surgeon here with that name, right? And you say the patient's there. No, we don't have a patient here with this name, right? The guy with the famous guy with his legs blown off.
Yeah.
Right? So even if it's in the New York Times saying so-and-so doctor reports from so-and-so hospital about so-and-so patient, you can no longer assume that there is a doctor named that anywhere, that he's at that hospital, and that the patient went there. Now, you can argue that that's just a clear-cut Hollywood thing, but I'm just trying to say this problem is spreading dramatically. And so don't assume that, you know, what you read in a major paper is true anymore. It can be total fiction.
So what, kind of segue into another area, but what do you think of the Gabby Giffords shooting? Now that to me just strikes me as a total Hollywood production with that Jared Lee Loughner and...
Well, but what about her? I mean, she seemed to have been shot.
Well, I don't know. I mean, was she really, or is it just an actor? And she was supposedly shot in the head through the brain, and then, you know, she's bounced right back. There's just a lot of suspicions there. I don't know if I don't know if you've looked into it too much.
Well, I'm not sure what I want to say on the air, but I'll say this. I have heard from a source where the family was seriously looking at stuff to improve brain performance. You know, the treatments for brain trauma of different sorts. And I happen to know a little bit about that. And so I think from that, and this was not a PR thing, this was a totally under the cover kind of thing. So I think that she did have brain damage of some sort.
So you think she got the powers that be special treatment, maybe?
Well, I think it was a Hollywood production, but I think the point is that judge was one of the few decent judges, and he was causing them a lot of problems. And I think that she might not have been the target. She might have just been collateral damage. But on the other hand, I think she was causing them a lot of trouble. Arizona, where that happened, is a key part of the whole attack and drug situation in Mexico. The drug wars in Mexico, the Fast and Furious, you know, a lot of stuff that's been going down. And I suspect that she and the judge were not on board with the whole criminal operation that's going down there. So I think the judge was the main target, but I think they would have been glad to get rid of her. But the thing smells like a total fabrication. And by the way, there's a guy who came out on the internet quickly with, you know, this is all fake, and here are videos proving it's all fake. And I don't trust him as far as I can throw him.
Is that Dallas Goldbug?
No comment. Um, so I'm suspicious. Let's just put it that way. Now, I'm not saying that evidence that any one person would come up with is true or false. I'm just saying that the whole thing smelled like an op on top of an op on top of an op. But I do think that judge was a real pain in the butt for them. And I think the judges in high positions, I mean, not some low-level judge, but I mean a high-level, like circuit-level judge or something. Look, they'll take you out. They'll hurt you. They'll hurt your family. And if you're out there trying to stop something important like the drug wars and the destabilization of northern Mexico, I mean, they're not going to show any mercy. So anyway, you asked, that's my take. I think there's a lot of Hollywood in it because the whole story makes no sense.
Well, that and the Sandy Hook and the Aurora, I mean, those three all just, they just seemed too similar, and they were like one right after another, bang, bang, bang. And all the suspects just seemed like these whacked out, nut jobs that were being drugged or something, or being mind controlled. I don't know.
Well, how to put that? Well, first of all, I think they're different things. I think the Aurora thing actually happened. I mean, whatever the number was, a huge number of people were gunned down. Yeah. And that was an operation by the dark side. Aurora...
that has a lot of occults. Yeah, there's all kinds of...
That's an occult location, occult everything. And that, to me, was an occult black magic ritual. And as a side benefit for them, they would like gun control. Okay? Right. But fundamentally, I think that was kind of like a religious ceremony for them. So that's where they're coming from. And we know that Denver is like the capital of the New World Order, at least the American branch, right?
Yeah.
So bad things come from that place. And, we had Columbine not far away from there, and that thing has like total dark ritualistic elements, and that's like an intelligence town. And we could go on and on about that. So I don't think you can compare, let's say, Sandy Hook and Aurora, because Sandy Hook is basically just a hoax. And it's possible that for the hell of it, they killed one or two people at some sense or did something. But I think I'm going to go back to what I'm saying, and I think everyone should think about, is that they're doing ops on top of ops on top of ops. And so, in Sandy Hook, they had military guys running away, and then they got like people caught in cars and things. But this is all, perhaps, in my mind, may all be part of the theater, part of the plot, to get you lost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, could be.
So you got to be very, very careful about this. It's like when you hear about in 9/11 dancing Israelis getting caught. Well, they were, and I think that was just something they hadn't planned on. But don't rule out the fact that if I were planning it anyway, if I were a bad guy planning these things, I would have these fake things. In other words, I would have 19 Israeli art students partying and getting arrested, and they had nothing to do with the whole thing. I would make that the focus. Okay? And
yeah,
then
but
the real 19 Israeli guys who were involved in the thing, right, would not be partying and getting busted. You know what I'm trying to say?
Well, the only problem with that though is it got hushed up and brushed under the rug really quickly. It was like that struck me as something that wasn't meant to be out there.
I agree with you on this particular one. But what I'm trying to say is, let's say in Sandy Hook, where you've got videos of guys in camo gear running around, and then you got a story of a guy saying there was like a guy in camo gear sitting in a cop car and all this other kind of stuff. And I'm not sure that that's unintentional. That may just be part of the plot.
Yeah, could very well be.
That's what I'm trying to say. Because if I were planning these things, I would have any of these events. I would have things, rabbit holes for people to go down. If you hate Muslims, I'll give you a Muslim version, right? Right? Like in the case of the Boston bombing, you had some Muslim guy quickly after the bomb getting up and running, and I guess they tackled him, and that story. He was perhaps Patsy B or C, right?
Yeah.
And he had some connection to bin Laden, I think, weren't they saying? Or the Saudi royal family or something like that. And that story quickly went away. So I would have a lot of things, rabbit holes for people to go down, is all I'm trying to say. Okay. And I think they're doing that so that if you dislike a certain group, if you dislike rednecks, you can blame it on rednecks. If you dislike Muslims, you can blame it on Muslims, that kind of thing. So I'm just saying we have to be careful and not fall into the idea that, how can I put it? The second level is true, because the second, third level may also be lies. That's all I want to point out. But, here's the thing. You see it with people in the alternative media. And they say, all of my stuff is sourced. It's all from mainstream media. Right? Right? You see that, right?
Yeah,
You see people saying that. And it's like, yeah, but your show, you're saying this is not good. Right? You're saying they're lying, spinning, manipulating, and now you're saying, yeah, but my information is from them. And I know the point they're trying to make, and I'm not trying to give them a hard time, really. I'm just trying to say that we're now in an age where they lie to us so flagrantly that we have to really wonder about what sources prove what. Anyway, that's just my take. It's a little bit different from the past. As I said, this is more of a high-tech period of time where they can do things differently. Back when President Lincoln was assassinated, well, Booth was a British agent, and they had a trial or two. They hanged people, right? It was a conspiracy, and now they don't even want people to know. But the truth of the matter is, the South knew it couldn't win militarily against the North. The issue was they were expecting the British and the French to help. And Britain and France very much wanted to help, and Spain too, by the way. But the Russians stopped it. The Russians had a good fleet, and they prevented the help from arriving, so to speak.
I didn't know that.
And this is, as a matter of fact, right now is like we're coming up on the 150th anniversary of the Russian fleet arriving in New York and San Francisco, because the southern states wanted to burn San Francisco, and with the help of the Mormons, and it's a complicated. Mm-hmm.
History is essentially repeating itself, except it's not New York; it's Syria.
Yeah. Well. It's an interesting situation. It's sad that we would have to be kind of rooting for Russia or China on some issue, but at least they seem to just want the world to do business, whereas it looks like the U.S. wants to blow everything up and kind of profit from the chaos. Mm. And if those are the two choices, then I'll go with the Chinese or Russian version. And I'm not happy about it, but I'm not going to apologize. I think it's a more. And anyway, as Putin's editorial said, look, the world is not going to function. The reason after World War II that the international setup was made with the United Nations was to avoid big wars. And if they throw that away, we're really, really pushing World War III. If the U.S. can just bomb any part of the world at will, even if Russia and China are very much against it, the world chaos is going to ensue.
Yeah, I think Putin said essentially what's going to happen to the United Nations is the same thing that happened to the League of Nations. Just became irrelevant and fell apart.
And not only that, everybody is going to be desperate to get nuclear bombs. It's your only hope of preventing the U.S. from bombing you.
Yeah, well, that's essentially what's been proved so far in Libya and Iraq. They gave up their weapons of mass destruction, and now those regimes are gone.
Yes, and so I think we're at risk of things falling apart. And so I'm not happy about it as an American, but if my choice is pro-business, Chinese view of the world or something, I would prefer theirs. Now, I realize that down the road they'll get worse and worse, and I understand that. But for now, if you've only got two bad choices or whatever, a mediocre choice and a bad choice, I'm going to choose the mediocre one. But, anyway, getting back to President Lincoln, though, the point was that it was a British kind of orchestrated thing, Southern Masonry. And by the way, for listeners, one thing they might not know is It's been proven that some of the radical slavery types were actually secretly friends with some of the radical anti-slavery types in the North. And I think that's because they were working for the British. They wanted that war to weaken the United States. And I think it was Bismarck. Anyway, one of the famous Germans said that in politics said that. He said European interests were working for a long, long time to try to break up or smash the U.S. And that makes perfect sense because it was a threat to their power. I mean, that's the way the world works. And in the case of Lincoln, though, you can see how it's interesting you have an actor as an intelligence agent. Isn't that interesting? Because they can travel around, meet interesting people, and if they do suspicious stuff, it's just got something to do with their theatrical stuff, right?
Yeah, it's the same with news people now, right? Reporters.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Putin where he was asked some question, and his response to the journalist is, "Do you work for a news agency or do you work for the CIA?"
Again, Putin has a way of...
And that's a good question, isn't it? That's a very good question. But anyway, as far as some other cases, some I'm not quite as sure about, like Dunblane, obviously, where all the kids were gunned down, and they've sealed up all the records, and it's really hard to know what actually happened very well. There are people with mental problems, but I think that when they want to pull off an operation, they can't rely on a guy with mental problems. A lot of them are not going to be good enough shooters to get the job done. And the other problem, I think this is a very important thing, is if you rely on a nut or a violent nut, and maybe he's on drugs, he may not do a very good job.
Yeah.
Not that long ago in Portland, Oregon, in the Portland, Oregon area, there was a guy in a mall or a shopping center who kind of wanted to go start shooting people. And an off-duty security guard pulled out a gun and stopped him. And after that happened right after one of these events, like the Sandy Hook. And I think that made the powers that be stop, or at least very seriously evaluate their plans, because the United States, people carrying, like concealed carry or other people, there's just a huge number of them, and a lot of them are very well trained, like ex-military, or you know what I mean, a lot of people who know how to shoot decently. And if you're going to rely on a nut in a place like a mall, that might be a very bad mistake. It may not go well. Your guy, because here's what the news is going to have to say. The news is going to say, off-duty security guard is a hero for preventing a massacre, right?
Guns saved lives,
right? Saved 50 lives from this lunatic who was planning to kill 50 people, right?
Yeah.
And now they control the media, so they didn't make this guy into a hero, right? And they played down the story. But I'm still arguing that I think that probably made them relax. I think they wanted to have a bunch of these things go. But then they had to say, well, this is dangerous because the message to people is going to be what they don't want the message to be.
Yeah, at the time I said, I think these were happening in December, and I said, I hope these idiots don't try to give us the 12 Days of Christmas, the Black Magician version.
I think they wanted to. But again, I think that, at least in the case of the United States, there are just too many people who are well-trained who are carrying all over the place. And so they can't rely on a nut. They need professionals to handle and take the case. And they also need a professional around to shoot the Patsy. Because one thing we didn't discuss in the Patsy management question is it's usually better to have them dead than alive.
Dead men tell no tales.
Now, it's now easier because of the court system being so rotten and corrupt today. But it used to be people could get access to them, right? And that was a problem. Now they're just putting them in black holes, and we don't even know if they're alive or dead or whatever. But it used to be somebody could find out, and the guy would say, hey, I didn't do it, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But certainly if the guy's dead, so what I'm trying to say is a professional team is what they need for these things.
And speaking of which, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but just brought to mind the friend of the Tsarnaev brothers they were interrogating, and apparently they said he tried to grab a knife or something, so they ended up shooting him in the interview. And I mean, he wasn't even a suspect; he was just being there for being detained for questioning, right?
Well, I think what happened is they told him what he saw and knew, and he didn't agree. That's what happens, is if when the FBI comes to you after a big event like the Kennedy assassination, they tell you what you saw and heard. They don't ask you; they tell you, and you better agree. That's really terrible. But that's also the danger of the people who are kind of like in the fringes of things, like the Chechen CIA terror gangs. If they need to, they will they'll ditch you in the harbor in concrete. Sorry, it's a dangerous world, and that's why you got to be careful. And I think they tried to get that MIT cop. I think they knew it. The reason for that, I think, is they knew that the regular cops would be too corrupted and dangerous and want to kill him. So I think they were trying to actually surrender to, and that was a bright idea, by the way. But they wanted what they wanted, so they just killed the cop. By they, I mean the powers that be. So they just killed the cop for no reason, and so that's
and a couple more cops, I think, had training accidents falling out of helicopters.
Yeah, well, that's the way it goes, I wish the cops would wake up to this, and the military. If you capture Bin Laden, your life expectancy is pretty at risk. Let's just put it that way. So that's some of the things. So the point is, these Patsies, their friends and family are seriously at risk. And so I think you have to assume they're going to lie forever. So let's say Oswald's wife, whatever she said, and everybody knows this, she said everything 10 different times since then. So anything she says has no validity, really. She could say, look, she's trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
Come on, you can't expect her to say the truth about anything. Sorry, it just doesn't work that way. But so these are some of the intros. I think it's just interesting to consider how superficially ridiculous so many of these Patsy and lone gunman stories are. I mean, seriously, if a person from a different culture, China, Russia, or an alien coming down, read about these things, they would think that we're all nuts, because, right? You know what I mean? I mean, as I said, an 8-year-old can tell it's all a bunch of BS. But it's just dangerous, and people don't want to think that their leadership is this rotten. But unfortunately, they are. And I guess before we wrap it up, any thoughts before we close on what may be coming? I think you mentioned that they may try some big events.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to even speculate about this type of thing, but maybe it's good if we do put these speculations out there, because if so many people are assuming these things are going to happen, then maybe that might prevent it. So my speculation would be that something big is gonna happen, and it's not going to be a Hollywood production. It will be to some extent, because they'll have all the news coverage and everything to push their agendas along. But it won't be staged in the same way that Boston was. It'll be a real event. And whatever, I'm not sure what the agenda is going to be at that time. I don't know if they want to make another crack at an excuse to invade the Middle East, or if they're going to push some agenda to bring North America together into one union, something to push that agenda along. I don't know. But I think there probably will be something coming down the pipe, and it's going to probably be big. And one theory I'd always speculated, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Chicago, because they got all those gold contracts that are real messy, and derivative contracts that it would be convenient for something to happen there to hide those anomalies.
Well, that's fair. Chicago is a mafia town. It's a comics town, which we call the Crimex. Those who don't know, the nickname is it's the Crimex, and the mayor is nothing to write home about. His father, I guess, was one of the key guys in founding Israeli intelligence. So that gives you an idea of the kind of strong man family he's from. Um, yeah, so that's certainly it's a possibility, but I think that we have to consider also that it depends on what they really want to do. Like you said, do they want a war in the Middle East? Do they want a serious turmoil with Russia and China? Do they want, you know what I mean? They have different choices here. And for example, I think, to be honest, the reason that they're not attacking in Syria or Iran is that Russian missile and anti-missile technology is too good.
Yeah.
I think it's simply. I think the main thing is it's a technical question that they'll lose too much. And if they lose totally, then it's game over. So they got a lot to lose, right? And I just think people are perhaps not aware of how good Russian missile stuff is. And, I think about not that long ago, recently, a couple of missiles were launched. And we can't get the details of it. They had different lies at different times. The Israelis might have sent them, or they were sent from NATO off the coast of Spain, or they're different stories, right? And so, there are treaties, unexpected missile launches are not okay. They're very dangerous depending on the location, the path, right? And in the current situation, it could easily lead to World War III. And it looks to me like the missiles were shot down, or at least one was shot down and one was damaged and couldn't do what it was essentially hit. That being the case, after that happened, I think you saw signs that the attacking side, the war side in the West, lost some of its enthusiasm. And there are all kinds of rumors about this. We could get into that. I mean, people who are sincere trying to look into this think that the Russians were furious. They said, look, you're going to start World War III by accident. Okay, sending missiles up in that part of the world is just not okay. And they said, okay, let's simplify your thinking. You've got, obviously your mind is not thinking clearly, so let's clarify your thinking. Consider an attack on Damascus, an attack on Moscow. That'll clarify your thinking. And I don't know, but I think they backed off after that.
Yeah, sure seems that way.
And so I think it's simply they pushed and pushed and pushed, and now it's Russia said, okay, we got the technology, because look, if you're not going to stop here, you're going to be going to Russia in a couple of years anyway, so we might as well, draw the line here. So we got a red line too. You got your red lines that are stupid. Well, we got a real red line. And I think they've got they have focused on missile technology for decades. And ever since they got rid of their criminal oligarchs and Putin's been in, their country's been on an incredible boom, technologically, economically, socially, you name it. And no, I don't think they want a war, but I just think that if the U.S. tried sending a bunch of missiles and they all got shot down and the Russian counterattacks took out a bunch of American assets or friendly stuff or whatever, it would be the end of the American empire right there. One day it's over. The dollar might collapse the next day. Because if the world woke up and said, oh my, you mean the U.S. can't boss people around? Everybody's going to immediately become friends with Russia and China. It's over. Game over for them. Game over. Unless they have, assets in space from Area 51. You know what I mean? The mothership can somehow do something. So, it's complicated, but they may, not have the options that some people assume they have, is all I'm trying to point out. I don't know. This is speculation. So in other words, they have an easy game inside the U.S. They could just blow things up. But it's not so clear to me that they will get what they want if they have, let's say, a big attack in Cairo, right? What are they going to get out of it, right? So I'm not sure what's going to happen. But as far as general patsies and lone gunmen, I think we're going to see more and more because I think the times are in a mess, so to speak. But having said that, I think they really do want more of this Hollywood trickery. And so I'm not sure with some of their patsies, how many of them are going to be real or how many of them are going to be fake. I mean, it used to be they were almost all real, Oswald, that back in those days.
I think it's just so risky now. They're losing more and more credibility every time they do this, and yeah, you've got an army of people that are picking everything apart. You've got hundreds of thousands of people that are looking at these events and going through all the minutia, and I don't know if they're going to risk it anymore.
And the other thing is, look at how they totally messed up this chemical weapons attack. Right? I mean, totally incompetent, embarrassing. They don't have any responses. And you got a lot of the world, like, again, the BRICS countries and others just saying, hey, your Al-Qaeda guys did this. And even inside the U.S., a lot of people are saying this. I don't know about Canada, but probably if you ask people, depends on how you phrase the poll, but a large percentage of people are going to say, which do you think is more likely to have done it, Assad or our Al-Qaeda guys or whatever? And I think a lot of people, 50% or something, are going to say, I think Al-Qaeda did it. And that, you got to understand, after something like the Kennedy assassination, if you said, how many think that, the oil companies did this, or you know what I mean? The answer would have been almost nobody, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly.
To have 50% say that it's a false flag is an incredibly dramatic achievement, because it means the other 50% can't ignore it. They have to treat it seriously, right? People who normally downplay conspiracies are now having to accept them, is my point.
Yeah.
So this is a big deal. So I don't know, but they, you mentioned the Crimex, right? So there's the derivatives and all that. They could take that down, and that's a good point. A couple of attack points that are not just blowing things up are they could have an internet attack. They could have a grid going down scenario. A lot of people think that might be what they would try. Take down the North American grid, and that would lead to a total dictatorial system. And you would not even be able to worry about those derivatives contracts or Crimex or whatever. Because if the grid goes down, they will selectively bring back what they want. And believe me, it will be very hard to do, whatever conspiracy research on the internet when they bring the grid back, because it will be for the good of the nation only kind of use or something, right? Now, I'm not saying they're going to do that, but I'm just pointing out we do need to think above and beyond the blow up a building scenario.
Yeah, well, definitely.
They might try something else. So that would be my thought, is the new Patsy might be a hacker from China who somehow manages to bring the North American grid down, right? And so we have to repudiate the debts to China, because they are an enemy country. Something like that. I'm just making that up, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
So I think we can call it a wrap for this week. So thanks everybody for coming, for listening.
All right.
And
Thanks,
Oolong, appreciate it. And take care. See you all next week. Bye-bye.